Experience doesn't make you invincible. If anything, it can make you more dangerous because confidence becomes your worst enemy. Connor Hayes had explored over 200 cave systems in 12 years, survived situations that would have killed most people, and earned a reputation as one of the best technical cavers on the East Coast. But on September 22, 2019, all that experience meant nothing when he made one split-second decision that wedged him into a passage called the Meat Grinder. What happened next proved that even the most skilled caver is just one mistake away from a coffin made of limestone. Welcome to Cave Stories, where we examine real cave accidents and the critical mistakes that turned adventure into tragedy. Connor Hayes wasn't a reckless thrill-seeker. He was a methodical, careful explorer who treated caving like a science. The 34-year-old software engineer from Pittsburgh had discovered caving during college and became obsessed. He took every training course available: vertical rope techniques, cave rescue, first aid, navigation, even basic geology. He invested thousands of dollars in top-quality gear. He kept detailed logs of every cave he'd explored, documenting routes, hazards, and conditions. His YouTube channel had over 50,000 subscribers who watched his educational caving videos. If anyone knew what they were doing underground, it was Connor Hayes. Devil's Throat Cave in West Virginia had been on Connor's list for 3 years. It was rated as extremely difficult, with several sections that required advanced technical skills. The cave was known for the Meat Grinder, a 40-foot-long passage that squeezed down to an 8 by 10-inch cross-section at its narrowest point. Only the smallest, most flexible cavers could make it through, and even they had to use specific techniques to avoid getting stuck. Connor had studied videos of the passage, read trip reports, and talked to people who'd successfully navigated it. He knew exactly what he was getting into. Or so he thought. Connor assembled a team of 3 other experienced cavers for the expedition. Daniel Park, his best friend and caving partner for 8 years, was a 32-year-old physical therapist who understood body mechanics and movement better than anyone Connor knew. If anyone could help navigate tight squeezes, it was Daniel. Stephanie Mills was a 29-year-old rock climbing instructor who'd been caving for 6 years and had the strength and flexibility to handle difficult passages. Andrew Foster was a 31-year-old professional photographer who documented cave systems for scientific organizations and outdoor magazines. All 4 of them were experienced, fit, and well-prepared. This wasn't a group of amateurs making rookie mistakes. This was a professional team with hundreds of combined cave trips under their belts. They spent 2 days preparing for the expedition. Connor created a detailed trip plan that included their route, estimated times for each section, emergency protocols, and a check-in schedule. They left copies of the plan with Connor's wife Emma and with the local cave rescue coordinator. They checked and double-checked their gear: helmets, headlamps with fresh batteries, backup lights, harnesses, rope, first aid kit, communication radios, emergency blankets, high-calorie food, and water. They even brought a portable CO2 meter to monitor air quality. This was textbook preparation. They did everything right. Almost everything. On the morning of September 22nd, they met at the trailhead at 7 a.m. The weather was perfect. Cool autumn air, clear skies, no rain in the forecast. They hiked the 2 miles to Devil's Throat Cave's entrance, arriving at 8:30 a.m. The entrance was impressive, a 20-foot-wide opening that descended at a 45-degree angle into the earth, like the cave was literally swallowing the hillside. They could feel cold air flowing out, the cave's breath, which meant good ventilation throughout the system. Before entering, Connor gathered the team for a final briefing. "All right, everyone knows the route. We'll take the main passage to the junction chamber, then head east to the gallery. After we explore and Andrew gets his photos, we'll attempt the Meat Grinder. If anyone feels uncomfortable at any point, we turn back. No arguments, no peer pressure. Everyone agreed. This was standard protocol for experienced cavers. Always have an exit strategy. Always respect people's limits. Always prioritize safety over ego. They entered Devil's Throat Cave at 9 a.m. The first section was a wide, sloping passage with excellent footing. They descended about 150 feet in elevation over the first quarter mile, their headlamps revealing stunning formations, massive flowstone cascades, delicate helictites that defied gravity, and cave pearls formed in ancient pools. Andrew stopped frequently to photograph, setting up his lights to capture the formations in their full glory. Connor filmed segments for his YouTube channel, explaining the geology and pointing out interesting features. At 10:15, they reached the junction room, a large chamber where 5 different passages converged. This was a famous landmark of Devil's Throat Cave, and Connor checked the digital map on his phone to confirm their location. Their timing was perfect. They were about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. They took a break to drink water and eat energy bars. The atmosphere was relaxed and confident. Everything was going very well. They proceeded through the eastern passageway toward the gallery, a section of the cave known for its incredible crystal formations. This passage required more technical maneuvers, crawling on hands and knees, squeezing through body-sized tubes, and climbing vertical sections. But for this experienced team, it was routine. They had all navigated tougher passages in other caves. Stephanie, who had a background in rock climbing, easily navigated the vertical sections. Daniel's flexibility came in handy in tight spaces. Andrew moved efficiently while carefully protecting the camera equipment. Connor, acting as the guide, regularly checked his map and verbally announced approaching obstacles. They reached the gallery at 11 a.m., and it was worth the effort. The chamber was about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, with walls covered in aragonite crystals that sparkled like diamonds in their lights. Delicate anthodites grew from the ceiling, their branching structures looking like frozen white flowers. Andrew went into photography mode, spending 20 minutes capturing the beauty from different angles. The others explored the chamber, marveling at the formations. This was why they loved caving, these hidden underground cathedrals that few people would ever see. At 11:25 a.m., Connor made the announcement that would change everything. "All right, team, if we're going to attempt the meat grinder, now's the time. We're on schedule, everyone's feeling good, and we've got plenty of time before our check-in." "Who's in?" Daniel immediately raised his hand. "I'm in. I've been preparing for this passage for months." Stephanie nodded. "Count me in. I want to see if all that yoga pays off." Andrew hesitated. "I think I'll sit this one out. My camera equipment makes me too bulky. I'll wait here and you guys can tell me about it." Connor accepted this without argument. Smart call. The meat grinder is no place for extra gear. The 3 of them left Andrew in the gallery and headed toward the meat grinder. The passage leading to it was already tight, requiring them to crawl on their bellies and use a swimming motion to propel themselves forward. Connor led, followed by Daniel, with Stephanie bringing up the rear. After about 100 feet of crawling, they reached the entrance to the meat grinder. It looked intimidating, even to experienced eyes. A narrow slot in the rock that descended at a slight angle, the walls closing in like jaws. Connor had studied the technique for this passage extensively. The key was body positioning. You had to enter at a specific angle, with your arms extended in front of you in a Superman position, your body twisted slightly to minimize your cross-sectional area. You exhaled completely to compress your chest, then used your toes and the friction of your body against the walls to inch forward. It required patience, technique, and absolute control over any panic response. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and you could wedge yourself in a position that was impossible to escape. Connor explained the technique to Daniel and Stephanie one more time. "Remember, arms forward, body twisted slightly right. Exhale before each push. Don't rush. If you feel stuck, stop and reassess. We'll go one at a time with at least 10 feet between us. I'll go first and call back when I'm through. Daniel, you're second. Stephanie, you bring up the rear. If anyone gets stuck, the person behind can try to help with a rope pull on your feet. Everyone understood. This was serious, technical caving, and they treated it with the respect it deserved. Connor approached the entrance to the meat grinder. He could see that the passage was about 40 feet long, narrowing progressively until it reached the infamous squeeze at about the 25-foot mark. Beyond that, it opened up slightly before connecting to another passage. People who'd made it through described the experience as claustrophobic but manageable if you kept your cool. Connor had kept his cool in tighter spots before. He was confident he could handle this. He positioned himself at the entrance, arms extended forward in the Superman position, his body twisted slightly to the right. He took several deep breaths, then exhaled completely and pushed forward into the meat grinder. The walls closed in immediately, touching his shoulders and hips. He used his toes to push, gained 6 inches, exhaled again, pushed back. The limestone was smooth here, worn down by the bodies of previous cavers, which helped with the sliding motion. 6 more inches, then another 6. He was making steady progress. At the 15-foot mark, the passage narrowed significantly. Connor could feel the walls pressing against his chest and back simultaneously. Technique became crucial here. He exhaled completely, collapsed his chest as much as possible, and pushed forward. He scraped against the rock ribs, but managed to get through the narrow passage. He could see the narrowest part about 10 feet ahead. That was the real test. Behind him, Daniel had entered the meat grinder and was using the same technique. Stephanie was waiting at the entrance, ready to move once Daniel had advanced far enough. Everything was going according to plan. And then Connor made a mistake. It wasn't a dramatic mistake, a moment of panic or carelessness. It was a small miscalculation, but it had major consequences. It was the biggest mistake made in caving, and it would be fatal. As Connor approached the narrowest section, he shifted his body position slightly, trying to see ahead more clearly. He twisted a few degrees to the left instead of maintaining his right side twist. It was an instinctive movement, barely conscious, the kind of adjustment your body makes automatically. But in a passage this tight, even a few degrees of rotation can change your cross-sectional area significantly. Connor pushed forward in this new position, and suddenly, he was stuck. Not gradually stuck, not slowly wedging in, but instantly, completely stuck. His chest was compressed between the walls in a way that prevented inhalation. His arms were extended forward, unreachable. His legs were behind him at an angle that gave no leverage. Connor's first thought was calm and analytical. Okay, I'm stuck. I need to reverse that rotation and get back to the right side position. He tried to twist his body back, but he couldn't. The pressure on his chest was too great. He tried to push backward with his toes, but the angle was wrong and he couldn't get any purchase on the smooth rock. He tried to pull forward with his arms, thinking maybe he could squeeze through the narrowest point, but his arms had no strength from that position. He was completely wedged, unable to move forward or backward, unable to adjust his position, and worst of all, unable to take a full breath. "Hey!" Connor called back, his voice strained. "I'm stuck. I need help." Daniel, who was about 12 feet behind him, immediately stopped moving. "Okay, stay calm. What's your position?" Connor described his situation as best he could. Daniel assessed the problem. "I'm going to try to reach your feet and see if I can pull you backward." Connor felt Daniel's hand grip his ankle moments later. "On 3, Daniel said. 1, 2, 3. Daniel pulled hard, trying to drag Connor backward, but Connor's body didn't budge. The friction and the wedging were too strong. Connor let out a gasp of pain as his ribs compressed further from the pulling force. "Stop!" Connor yelled. "That's making it worse!" Daniel released immediately. Behind him, Stephanie called forward. "What's happening?" Daniel explained the situation, and Stephanie's response was immediate and professional. I'm going back to get Andrew and we're calling for rescue. Daniel, stay with Connor and keep him calm. Daniel acknowledged, and they could hear Stephanie backing out of the passage, her movements urgent but controlled. Connor tried to remain calm, but the reality of his situation was becoming terrifying. He couldn't take a full breath. Each inhalation was shallow, maybe 30% of his normal lung capacity. The walls were pressing on his chest from both sides, acting like a vice that prevented his ribcage from expanding. He could feel his heart rate increasing, which required more oxygen, but he couldn't get enough air. It was a vicious cycle that he recognized from his training. Panic increases oxygen demand, but the situation prevents adequate oxygen intake, which increases panic. He had to break the cycle. Connor. Daniel's voice came from behind him, calm and steady. Listen to me. You're going to be okay. Stephanie's getting help. Focus on slow, controlled breathing. Don't try to take deep breaths, just take small, efficient breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that? Connor tried to follow the instructions. Small breath in, small breath out. It helped, marginally. But he could already feel the effects of reduced oxygen. His head was starting to feel fuzzy. His thoughts were becoming less clear. How long can I survive like this? He wondered. An hour? 2 hours? Less? Daniel kept talking, keeping Connor engaged and focused. Tell me about your last big trip. Where did you go? Connor, grateful for the distraction, started talking about a cave system in Kentucky he'd explored 2 months earlier. His voice was weak and strained, but talking helped keep his mind off the crushing pressure on his chest. Daniel responded with his own stories, maintaining a steady stream of conversation. Behind them, time was passing, but in the darkness of the meat grinder, neither of them had any real sense of how much. Stephanie reached Andrew in the gallery in record time, backing out of the tight passage faster than she'd ever moved through a cave. Andrew took one look at her face and knew something was seriously wrong. Connor's stuck in the meat grinder. Can't move, can't breathe well. We need rescue immediately. Andrew was already pulling out the satellite communication device they'd brought for emergencies. Unlike cell phones, which didn't work underground, this device could send messages through rock to a surface unit they'd left at the cave entrance. He typed out the emergency message. Caver stuck. Meat grinder. Breathing restricted. Immediate rescue needed. He hit send and the device confirmed transmission. On the surface, the emergency beacon at the cave entrance received the message and automatically forwarded it to the local emergency services and the cave rescue coordinator. Within 5 minutes, Captain Patrick O'Brien of the West Virginia Cave Rescue Team received the alert. Connor Hayes stuck in Devil's Throat, the meat grinder passage breathing issues. Patrick's response was immediate. He'd been caving for 25 years and had conducted over 50 successful cave rescues. But he also knew the meat grinder's reputation. People had gotten stuck there before, but they'd always been able to self-rescue or be pulled out relatively quickly. If Connor Hayes, one of the most experienced cavers in the region, was stuck badly enough to call for rescue, this was serious. Patrick activated the rescue team, calling in 12 specialized cave rescue personnel. They assembled at the fire station with their equipment, rescue harnesses, mechanical advantage pulley systems, hydraulic spreading tools, medical supplies, and portable oxygen. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a physician who specialized in cave rescue medicine, joined the team. They loaded everything into trucks and headed for Devil's Throat Cave. The drive would take 45 minutes. Then they'd have to hike 2 miles and navigate through the cave to reach Connor. Patrick estimated they could reach him in about 2 hours. The question was, could Connor survive 2 hours wedged in a passage that prevented normal breathing? Back in the meat grinder, Connor was struggling. 30 minutes had passed since he'd gotten stuck, though it felt like hours. The shallow breathing was taking its toll. His fingers were starting to tingle, a sign of low oxygen in his blood. His head felt heavy and his thoughts were becoming sluggish. He knew what was happening. Hypoxia, the medical term for insufficient oxygen reaching the tissues. If it continued, he'd eventually lose consciousness. And if he lost consciousness while wedged in this position, unable to breathe properly, he would die. Daniel continued talking, but he was running out of stories. He'd been maintaining constant communication with Stephanie and Andrew through shouts that echoed back through the passages. They'd updated him that rescue was on the way, ETA about 90 minutes. Daniel did the math in his head and didn't like the answer. Connor had been stuck for 30 minutes and was already showing signs of oxygen deprivation. 90 more minutes? That might be too long. "Connor," Daniel said carefully, "I need to tell you something. The rescue team is coming, but they won't be here for about an hour and a half. We need to try something else. We need to get you unstuck before they arrive." Connor's response was slow, his words slightly slurred. "What? What can we do? I can't move." Daniel had been thinking about this, analyzing the problem from his physical therapy background. "Your chest is compressed, but what about your hips? Can you feel any movement there?" Connor tried to focus. He attempted to shift his hips, even slightly. There was the tiniest bit of give, maybe a quarter inch of movement. "Yeah, little bit. Not much?" Daniel seized on this. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to push on your feet while you try to twist your hips to the right. If we can get your body back into that right side rotation, you might be able to breathe better and maybe even get unstuck. It's going to hurt, and you need to give it everything you've got. You understand?" Connor understood. This was his best chance. If they could rotate his body back to the original position, the cross-sectional area would decrease and he might be able to either push forward through the squeeze or pull backward to safety. But it would require tremendous effort and pain tolerance. His ribs were already bruised and compressed. Forcing rotation would grind them against the limestone. But the alternative was waiting and hoping he could survive another 90 minutes of oxygen deprivation. "On 3, Daniel said. 1, 2, 3. Daniel pushed with all his strength on Connor's feet, trying to create forward momentum and rotation. Connor simultaneously tried to twist his hips to the right, using muscles he didn't even know he had, ignoring the screaming pain from his compressed ribs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Connor felt movement, just a fraction of an inch, but movement. His body rotated maybe 2 degrees to the right. It wasn't enough to free him, but it was something. "Again!" Connor gasped. "Do it again!" They repeated the maneuver, another 2 degrees of rotation. Connor could feel a microscopic increase in his ability to breathe. His chest compression was slightly less severe. They tried a 3rd time, and this time Connor felt something different. Not movement forward or backward, but a shift in pressure. The vice-like grip on his chest changed slightly, becoming marginally less crushing. He could take a breath that was maybe 40% of normal instead of 30%. It was a small improvement, but it might be enough to keep him alive until rescue arrived. But they'd also created a new problem. The effort of forcing the rotation had exhausted both of them. Daniel was breathing hard, his muscles burning from the exertion in the cramped space. Connor was on the verge of passing out from the combination of oxygen deprivation, pain, and physical effort. They couldn't sustain this kind of rescue attempt. They needed the professionals and their specialized equipment. "Okay," Daniel panted. "We're going to wait for the rescue team now. You're in a slightly better position. Just focus on breathing. Small breaths. Stay with me, buddy." Connor wanted to respond, but he didn't have the energy. He focused all his attention on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Small, controlled breaths. Don't panic. Don't think about the tons of rock pressing against your chest. Don't think about being trapped 400 feet underground in a passage narrower than a coffin. Just breathe. At 12:47 p.m., Captain Patrick O'Brien and his rescue team arrived at the Devil's Throat Cave entrance. They'd made excellent time, driven by the urgency of the situation. Patrick knew Connor Hayes by reputation. If Connor was stuck badly enough to need rescue, this wasn't a simple extraction. This was going to be a complex, technical operation. He briefed his team at the entrance. "We have an experienced caver wedged in the meat grinder passage. He's been stuck for approximately 50 minutes with restricted breathing. Time is critical. We move fast but safe. Dr. Walsh, you're with the first wave. We need medical assessment as soon as we reach him." The rescue team entered the cave, moving with practiced efficiency. They carried their equipment in specialized packs designed for tight passages. Hydraulic spreading tools broken down into components, pulley systems, medical supplies, and portable oxygen. 12 rescuers moved through Devil's Throat Cave like a well-oiled machine, each person knowing their role. They reached the junction chamber in 35 minutes, excellent time given the difficulty of the route and the amount of equipment they were carrying. Stephanie and Andrew met them at the junction chamber, their faces showing the strain of the last hour. Stephanie briefed Captain O'Brien on Connor's exact location and condition. He's about 25 feet into the meat grinder, stuck at the narrowest section. His chest is compressed and he can't breathe normally. Daniel Park is behind him, about 12 feet back, maintaining verbal contact. Patrick nodded. "Is there room for rescue personnel to reach him?" Stephanie shook her head. "The passage is too narrow. Only one person can approach from behind, and they can't get close enough to do much more than touch his feet." Patrick assessed the situation rapidly. This changed everything. If they couldn't reach Connor from behind to pull him out, they'd have to try to push him forward through the narrowest section. But pushing someone who was already stuck through an even tighter space? That was incredibly dangerous. The alternative was to widen the passage using the hydraulic spreaders, but that could take hours and risked causing a rock collapse. There were no good options, only less bad ones. Dr. Walsh spoke up. "What's his oxygen saturation status? Has anyone been able to get a reading?" Stephanie shook her head. "No way to get equipment to him. We only have verbal communication." Dr. Walsh's expression was grim. If he's been breathing at reduced capacity for over an hour, he's likely hypoxic. Confusion, loss of coordination, possible loss of consciousness. We need to get oxygen to him immediately, or we're looking at brain damage or death within the next hour. Patrick made his decision. "Walsh, you and I are going to the entrance of the meat grinder. We'll get as close as we can and assess. Team Alpha, start assembling the hydraulic spreaders. If we need to widen the passage, we need to be ready to move immediately. Team Bravo, rig the pulley system for a potential backward extraction. Move." The rescue team split into their assigned groups and went to work. Patrick and Dr. Walsh navigated through the gallery and reached the entrance to the meat grinder at 1:35 p.m. They could see Daniel's feet protruding from the passage. Daniel heard them approach and called back. "Thank God you're here. Connor's in bad shape. He's conscious but barely responsive. His breathing is shallow and his speech is slurred." Patrick called into the passage. "Connor, this is Captain O'Brien with West Virginia Cave Rescue. We're going to get you out. Can you hear me?" There was a long pause, then Connor's voice, weak and distorted by the narrow passage. "Hear you. Can't breathe. Hurts." Patrick recognized the signs immediately. Connor was severely hypoxic and probably in significant pain. They needed to act fast. Dr. Walsh called into the passage. "Connor, I'm Dr. Walsh. I need you to listen carefully. We're going to get oxygen to you, but you need to stay conscious. Can you do that?" Another long pause. "Try. Not sure. How long?" Patrick turned to Dr. Walsh. "We need to make a decision now. Do we try to push him forward, pull him back, or widen the passage? Each option has risks. Dr. Walsh did rapid calculations in her head. Given his current oxygen status and level of consciousness, I'd estimate we have maybe 45 minutes before he loses consciousness. Completely. Once that happens, his airway could compromise and we'd be looking at death within minutes. Whatever we do, we need to do it fast. Patrick made the call. We're going to try a forward push first. If his body rotated into the stuck position, rotating back and pushing forward might work. If that fails, we go to hydraulic spreading. Team Alpha, bring the spreaders as close as you can get them. Dr. Walsh, talk Connor through what we're doing. Keep him conscious and focused. Dr. Walsh positioned herself at the entrance to the meat grinder and began speaking in a calm, authoritative voice. Connor, we're going to push you forward through the narrow section. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's the fastest way to get you out. I need you to exhale completely when I tell you to. Then use your toes to push. Your friend Daniel is going to push on your feet. Coordinate with him. Do you understand? Connor's response was barely audible. Understand. Patrick had Daniel position himself to push on Connor's feet with maximum force. He brought in 2 more small-framed rescuers who could fit into the passage behind Daniel, creating a human chain of pushing force. On my mark, Patrick commanded. Connor, exhale everything. Daniel, maximum force. 3, 2, 1, push. The 3 rescuers pushed with tremendous force on Daniel's feet, who in turn pushed on Connor's feet. Dr. Walsh heard Connor cry out in pain as his body was forced forward against the rock. They gained maybe half an inch of movement before Connor's body stopped, completely wedged again. Stop! Dr. Walsh commanded. Connor, are you okay? There was no response. Connor? Still nothing. She looked at Patrick with fear in her eyes. He's unconscious. We just lost our patient cooperation. This just became a recovery operation unless we can wake him up or get him out in the next few minutes. Patrick made an instant decision. Forget the pushing. Get the hydraulic spreaders up here now. We're widening the passage. Team Alpha had anticipated this and were already moving. They brought the portable hydraulic spreading tool, a device about the size of a car jack that could generate 10 tons of spreading force. It was designed to be inserted into cracks and used to split rock. The problem was getting it into position in the meat grinder without causing a collapse. 2 specialized rescue engineers assessed the passage structure. They identified a natural crack in the limestone about 15 feet into the meat grinder, right where the passage began its most severe narrowing. If they could widen that section by even 2 inches, it might be enough for Connor's body to pass through. They carefully inserted the hydraulic spreader into the crack, working with millimeter precision. One wrong move, one crack propagating in the wrong direction, and they could bring down several tons of rock on Connor's head. The spreader was in position. The engineer operating it looked at Patrick for confirmation. This is going to make noise and the rock might shift unpredictably. There's risk. Patrick nodded. Do it. Connor's life is worth the risk. The engineer activated the hydraulic spreader. There was a mechanical whine as the device began applying force to the crack. Then a sharp crack as the limestone began to split. Then a grinding sound as the passage walls shifted microscopically. 2 inches of widening. That's all they needed. 2 inches that might mean the difference between life and death. The passage widened, not dramatically, but measurably. The engineer checked with precision measuring tools. 1.8 inches of spreading at the critical section. Close enough. Patrick ordered the spreader removed and called into the passage. Connor! Connor, can you hear me? No response. Dr. Walsh spoke urgently. We need to extract him immediately. He's not breathing adequately and he's unconscious. Brain damage begins after 4 to 6 minutes of oxygen deprivation. We're approaching that threshold. The rescue team prepared for the extraction. With the passage slightly wider, they had a chance of pulling Connor backward. They couldn't reach his body to attach a harness, but they could rig a rope around his ankles and use a mechanical advantage pulley system to generate tremendous pulling force. It was crude, potentially injurious, but it was their only option. They set up a 6-to-1 mechanical advantage system using pulleys anchored to solid rock formations. 6 rescuers on the rope, each one pulling with 150 pounds of force, translated into 900 pounds of force on Connor's ankles. It should be enough to overcome the friction and wedging. On Patrick's command, the 6 rescuers pulled. The rope went taut. Connor's body didn't move. "Pull harder," Patrick commanded. The rescuers heaved with everything they had. There was a sickening scraping sound as Connor's body began to move, sliding backward against the limestone. His shirt tore, skin abraded, but he was moving. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. They pulled him back through the widened section, then through the slightly less narrow section, until finally, after 4 agonizing minutes of pulling, Connor's upper body emerged from the meat grinder. Dr. Walsh was on him immediately. She checked his airway. Clear, but breathing was weak and irregular. She checked his pulse, present but rapid and thready. His oxygen saturation, measured with a portable pulse oximeter, was at 78%, dangerously low. His skin was pale and cold. He had obvious rib contusions and abrasions all over his torso. But he was out, and he was alive. Barely. Dr. Walsh initiated emergency medical treatment. She placed a non-rebreather oxygen mask on Connor's face, pushing pure oxygen into his lungs at 15 liters per minute. She started an IV line in his arm and began administering fluids. She checked his neurological status. Pupils were responsive but sluggish, no obvious signs of stroke or brain bleeding, but the extended hypoxia had definitely caused damage. The question was, how much? After 2 minutes of high-flow oxygen, Connor's oxygen saturation began to climb 82%, 85%, 88%, 91%. His color improved from ashen to pale. His breathing became stronger and more regular. And then, miraculously, his eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak, but Dr. Walsh stopped him. "Don't talk. Just breathe. You're out. You're safe." Connor's eyes filled with tears. He was alive. The next challenge was getting Connor out of Devil's Throat Cave. He was conscious but extremely weak, unable to walk or even sit up without assistance. His ribs were severely bruised, possibly fractured, and every movement caused excruciating pain. Dr. Walsh administered morphine for pain management, but she had to be careful with the dosage. Too much could depress his breathing, which was already compromised. They needed to move him through 400 feet of difficult cave passages, including tight crawls, vertical sections, and uneven terrain. It would be one of the most challenging cave evacuations the rescue team had ever attempted. Captain O'Brien organized the evacuation with military precision. They had a specialized cave rescue stretcher, a flexible basket made of lightweight aluminum and high-strength fabric that could be bent and twisted to navigate tight passages. They carefully secured Connor into the stretcher, immobilizing his spine and ribs as much as possible. 6 rescuers would carry the stretcher in rotating teams of 3, with the other 3 resting. The journey to the surface would take approximately 3 hours, moving slowly and carefully to avoid injuring Connor further or putting the rescuers at risk. Daniel, Stephanie, and Andrew watched the preparation with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that Connor was alive, horror at how close they'd come to losing him. Daniel was particularly shaken. He'd been the one pushing on Connor's feet, the one trying to help him rotate, the one maintaining verbal contact as Connor's condition deteriorated. He kept replaying the situation in his mind, wondering if there was something more he could have done, some way he could have prevented this disaster. It was survivor's guilt combined with rescuer's guilt, a toxic combination that would haunt him for years. The evacuation began at 2:45 p.m. The rescue team moved Connor through the passages with incredible skill and patience. In some sections, they had to pass the stretcher overhead, one person at a time holding it above their heads. In vertical sections, they rigged rope systems to lower him carefully. In the tightest crawls, they had to bend the stretcher almost in half with Connor secured inside, his face inches from the cave ceiling. Every movement was agony for Connor despite the morphine. He bit down on a cloth to avoid screaming, knowing that panic could cause him to thrash and potentially injure himself worse or endanger the rescuers. Dr. Walsh stayed with Connor throughout the evacuation, constantly monitoring his vital signs. His oxygen saturation remained stable at around 92 to 94% with the supplemental oxygen, but his heart rate was elevated and his blood pressure was concerning. She worried about internal injuries they couldn't see or treat in the cave environment. Rib fractures could have punctured a lung, causing a pneumothorax that would collapse his breathing. Abdominal organs could have been damaged during the extraction. There could be internal bleeding they wouldn't know about until it was too late. She kept these fears to herself, maintaining a calm exterior while internally preparing for every possible complication. At one particularly difficult section, about 200 feet from the entrance, Connor's condition suddenly worsened. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his oxygen saturation dropped to 85%, and he became disoriented and confused. Dr. Walsh recognized the signs immediately. He was either having a panic attack brought on by the trauma and the claustrophobic environment, or he was developing a more serious complication like a collapsed lung. She made the decision to increase his oxygen flow to maximum and administer a mild sedative. The sedative would calm him but also depress his breathing further, a dangerous trade-off. But letting him panic in the stretcher could cause injury to himself and the rescuers. The sedative worked. Connor's breathing slowed and his oxygen saturation climbed back to 91%. But now he was semi-conscious, unable to help with his own rescue at all. The team continued moving, acutely aware that they were racing against multiple medical clocks, infection from his abraded wounds, internal bleeding that might not be apparent yet, and the cumulative effects of the trauma on his system. Young, healthy people can survive incredible trauma, but there's always a limit. They needed to get Connor to a hospital, and they needed to do it soon. At 5:38 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the extraction from the meat grinder, the rescue team emerged from Devil's Throat Cave. An ambulance was waiting, along with Connor's wife, Emma, who had been notified of the emergency hours earlier and had driven from Pittsburgh in a state of terrified anticipation. When she saw the stretcher being carried out, saw her husband's pale face and battered body, she let out a sob and tried to run to him. A police officer gently held her back. "Let them work, ma'am. They need to get him to the hospital. You can ride in the ambulance." The paramedics took over from the cave rescue team, transferring Connor to their advanced life support stretcher. They performed a rapid assessment. Blood pressure 90/60, low but not critical. Heart rate 118, elevated. Oxygen saturation 93% on high-flow oxygen. Respiratory rate 24, elevated. Pain level impossible to assess as patient was semi-conscious. Obvious rib injuries and extensive abrasions. Possible internal injuries. They loaded him into the ambulance, allowed Emma to climb in, and with sirens wailing, began the 40-minute drive to Charleston Area Medical Center, the nearest trauma hospital with the resources to handle his injuries. During the ambulance ride, Connor drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was conscious, he tried to speak to Emma, but the oxygen mask and his weakened condition made it difficult. Emma held his hand, tears streaming down her face, telling him over and over that he was going to be okay, that she loved him, that he needed to stay with her. Connor squeezed her hand weakly, trying to communicate what he couldn't say out loud. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for scaring you. I'm sorry for making you go through this." The paramedics radioed ahead to the trauma center with Connor's information, allowing the hospital to prepare. When the ambulance arrived at 6:22 p.m., a full trauma team was waiting. Emergency physicians, surgeons, respiratory therapists, nurses, radiology technicians. Connor was rushed into a trauma bay where organized chaos ensued. They cut away his remaining clothes, exposing the full extent of his injuries. His torso was covered in abrasions and contusions, dark purple bruises spreading across his ribcage. They inserted additional IV lines, drew blood for extensive lab work, and wheeled him to the CT scanner for full-body imaging. The CT scan revealed the damage. Connor had 4 fractured ribs on his right side and 3 on his left. Miraculously, none had punctured his lungs, but there was significant soft tissue trauma around the fracture sites. His right kidney showed signs of contusion, likely from the compression during his time stuck in the passage. There was no active internal bleeding, but there was fluid accumulating in his chest cavity, suggesting that bleeding had occurred and might resume. His spine and skull showed no fractures, a huge relief. The brain scan showed no bleeding or swelling, but there were signs of hypoxic injury, areas where the lack of oxygen had damaged tissue. The extent of that damage wouldn't be clear for days or weeks. Dr. Marcus Richardson, the trauma surgeon, reviewed the scans and made his assessment. He explained to Emma in the waiting room, "Your husband is in serious but stable condition. The rib fractures are significant and will require 6 to 8 weeks to heal. We're going to keep him in the ICU for at least 48 hours to monitor for complications. The kidney contusion should heal on its own, but we'll watch it carefully. My biggest concern right now is the lung function. He spent over 2 hours with severely restricted breathing, and that kind of trauma can cause lasting damage. We're also concerned about the brain. The hypoxic injury we see on the scan might be temporary or it might be permanent. We won't know for several days." Emma listened, trying to process the information through her shock and fear. Will he be okay? Will he be the same person? Dr. Richardson gave her the honest answer that doctors give in these situations. "I don't know. We'll do everything we can, but brain injuries are unpredictable. Some people recover fully. Others have lasting cognitive or personality changes. We have to wait and see how he responds over the next few days." Connor spent 3 days in the intensive care unit. The first 24 hours were critical, with medical staff monitoring him constantly for signs of bleeding, infection, or neurological deterioration. His pain was immense despite strong medications. Every breath hurt because of the fractured ribs. He developed pneumonia on the 2nd day, a common complication when rib fractures prevent deep breathing and coughing. The infection caused fever and further respiratory compromise, requiring even higher levels of oxygen support and intravenous antibiotics. But slowly, agonizingly, Connor improved. His oxygen requirements decreased. The pneumonia responded to antibiotics. His kidney function remained stable. On the 4th day, he was moved from the ICU to a regular hospital room, a sign that he was out of immediate danger. But the question of brain damage remained unanswered. Connor was conscious and could speak, but Emma noticed changes. He seemed slower to respond to questions. His memory of the incident was fragmented and confused. He had trouble concentrating when she tried to talk to him about anything complex. Neurologists and neuropsychologists evaluated Connor extensively. They performed cognitive tests, memory assessments, and executive function evaluations. The results were mixed. Some aspects of Connor's cognitive function were intact: his long-term memory, his vocabulary, his basic reasoning skills. But other areas showed deficits. His working memory was impaired, making it hard for him to hold multiple pieces of information in his mind simultaneously. His processing speed was slower than it had been before the incident. He had difficulty with complex problem-solving tasks that he would have handled easily before. The doctors explained that these deficits might improve over time with rehabilitation, or they might be permanent. Again, they had to wait and see. Connor was discharged from the hospital after 9 days. He went home with a long list of medications, a referral to pulmonary rehabilitation for his breathing issues, appointments with neurologists and neuropsychologists for cognitive therapy, and strict orders to avoid any strenuous activity for at least 3 months. His ribs would take time to heal. His brain might take even longer, or it might never fully heal. The psychological impact was as severe as the physical injuries, maybe worse. Connor, who had been one of the most confident and capable cavers on the East Coast, was now terrified of confined spaces. He couldn't go into small rooms without feeling panic. He had nightmares almost every night, dreams of being trapped, unable to breathe, feeling the walls closing in. He woke up gasping, his heart racing, convinced he was still in the meat grinder. Emma would hold him and talk him through the panic attacks, but she knew she couldn't fix this. He needed professional help. Connor began working with a trauma therapist who specialized in PTSD. The diagnosis was clear. Connor was suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of his near-death experience in Devil's Throat Cave. The therapy helped gradually. He learned coping mechanisms for the panic attacks. He practiced exposure therapy, gradually working up to being in smaller spaces for short periods. But he knew with absolute certainty that he would never go caving again. That chapter of his life was over. The thing he'd loved most in the world had nearly killed him, and he couldn't go back to it. Daniel Park also struggled profoundly after the incident. Even though he'd done everything he could to help Connor, even though the rescue team had praised his actions for keeping Connor alive until they arrived, Daniel felt responsible. If only I'd been able to pull him out, he thought. If only I'd suggested we skip the meat grinder. If only I'd insisted we turn back earlier. The if-onlys consumed him, leading to depression and his own case of PTSD. He stopped caving entirely and even avoided outdoor activities that had once brought him joy. His friendship with Connor survived, but was forever changed, marked by the shared trauma they could never fully escape. Stephanie Mills and Andrew Foster also gave up caving after Devil's Throat Cave. Stephanie threw herself into her rock climbing instruction but never went underground again. Andrew continued his photography career but focused on surface environments, never again seeking the hidden beauty of the underground world. The 4 friends who had entered Devil's Throat Cave as a confident, experienced team emerged as traumatized survivors, forever changed by what they'd experienced. The investigation into the incident was thorough and complex. The West Virginia Cave Rescue Team conducted a detailed analysis of what went wrong and why. Their findings were published in the National Speleological Society's accident reports, becoming a case study for caving safety education. The primary cause of the incident was identified as a body positioning error. Connor had rotated his body at the critical moment, changing his cross-sectional profile and causing him to wedge instantly. But why had he made that error? The investigation revealed several contributing factors. First, Connor had gained approximately 5 pounds in the month since he'd last done serious technical caving. 5 pounds doesn't sound like much, but in a passage measured in inches, it's significant. His body was literally larger than the last time he'd attempted similar squeezes. Second, he was wearing a slightly thicker base layer than he usually wore, adding another fraction of an inch to his profile. Third, and perhaps most critically, he'd been slightly fatigued from the 3-hour journey to reach the meat grinder, and fatigue reduces coordination and precision. These tiny factors, individually insignificant, combined to create the conditions for disaster. But the deeper finding was more troubling. Experienced cavers are at particular risk because they become confident, sometimes overconfident, in their abilities. Connor had successfully navigated dozens of tight passages over the years. He'd trained extensively. He'd made careful preparations. But he'd also developed a sense of invincibility, a belief that his experience and skill would protect him. This confidence had made him willing to attempt the meat grinder when someone less experienced might have looked at the passage and wisely decided not to try. Experience had paradoxically increased his risk. This finding resonated throughout the caving community, prompting serious discussions about how even the most skilled cavers need to maintain healthy respect for the dangers they face. The meat grinder passage itself became the subject of controversy. Some argued that it should be permanently closed, either by gating or by intentionally collapsing it to prevent future accidents. Others argued that it should remain open, but with clear warning signs and recommendations that only cavers under a certain size and weight attempt it. Ultimately, the property owner decided to install a gate at the entrance to Devil's Throat Cave, requiring potential visitors to obtain a permit and demonstrate adequate experience and preparation. The meat grinder remained physically accessible, but the permitting process significantly reduced the number of people attempting it. Connor's story spread through the caving community and beyond. His YouTube channel, which he'd been so proud of, became a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. In one of his final videos, posted 6 months after the incident, Connor spoke directly to the camera from his home. His speech was still slightly slower than it had been before, a subtle reminder of the brain injury he'd sustained. He said, "I want to talk about what happened to me in Devil's Throat Cave. A lot of people have asked me what went wrong, and the simple answer is, I made a mistake. But the deeper answer is more complicated. I let confidence override caution. I thought that because I'd done harder caves, I could handle this one. I underestimated how little room for error exists in a place like the meat grinder. I forgot that no amount of experience makes you invincible. And I nearly paid for that mistake with my life." He continued, "If you're watching this and you love caving, please learn from what happened to me. Respect the cave, respect your limits. Don't let ego or confidence push you into situations where there's no room for mistakes. Because in a passage that tight, one small error can mean death. I survived by pure luck and because I had an amazing rescue team. But I'm not the same person I was before. I have cognitive deficits that might never fully heal. I have PTSD that affects my daily life. I lost something I loved because I didn't respect how dangerous it could be. Don't make the same mistake I did." The video went viral, viewed over 2 million times, and shared across social media platforms. It became required viewing in caving training courses. Connor received thousands of messages from people thanking him for his honesty and his willingness to share his story. Many admitted that they'd been planning similar risky cave trips and had reconsidered after watching his video. If his near-death experience could prevent even one other tragedy, Connor said, then maybe there was some meaning in the suffering. Connor's physical recovery continued slowly over the following year. His ribs healed completely. His kidney function returned to normal. His lung capacity improved with respiratory therapy, though he never regained 100% of his pre-incident function. The cognitive deficits persisted but improved marginally with extensive neuropsychological rehabilitation. He learned compensatory strategies for his working memory issues and processing speed deficits. He returned to his software engineering job, but had to request accommodations for his cognitive challenges. His employer was understanding and supportive, but Connor knew he'd never perform at the level he had before the accident. That was another thing the cave had taken from him. The emotional and psychological recovery was even slower. The PTSD improved with therapy, but never completely disappeared. Connor still had nightmares, still felt panic in small spaces, still carried the trauma of those hours wedged in the meat grinder. His relationship with Emma was strained by the ordeal. She loved him deeply and supported him completely, but she also carried her own trauma from the experience, the terror of nearly losing him, the stress of his recovery, the changes in the person she'd married. They attended couples therapy to work through these issues, and their relationship survived, but it too was forever marked by what had happened. 3 years after the incident, Connor agreed to return to Devil's Throat Cave. Not to go inside, but to stand at the entrance as part of his trauma therapy. His therapist believed that confronting the place where the trauma occurred in a safe and controlled way might help him process and integrate the experience. Connor was terrified, but agreed to try. He drove to West Virginia with Emma and his therapist, hiked the familiar trail to the cave entrance, and stood looking at the dark opening that had nearly killed him. He stood there for 10 minutes, silent tears running down his face, while Emma held his hand and his therapist talked him through his emotions. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Just seeing the entrance, acknowledging what had happened, and walking away alive was enough. On the drive home, Connor was quiet for a long time. Then he said to Emma, "I don't forgive the cave. Caves aren't moral agents that can be forgiven, but I think I'm finally starting to forgive myself for the mistake I made, for the consequences of that mistake, for not being the person I was before." Emma squeezed his hand. "That's good. That's really good." Connor Hayes never caved again. He found other passions, other ways to challenge himself that didn't involve being underground. He took up long-distance cycling, something he could do in open spaces under the sky where he could breathe freely. He became an advocate for cave safety, speaking at conferences and writing articles about risk management in extreme sports. He donated his extensive caving gear to training programs, passing on the tools he'd once relied on to the next generation of cavers, hoping they'd use them more wisely than he had. The story of Connor Hayes and the meat grinder became one of the most well-known cave accidents in modern history, not because it was the most dramatic or the deadliest, but because it happened to someone who should have known better, someone who'd done everything right except for one tiny moment of error. It serves as a reminder that experience doesn't equal immunity, that confidence can be as dangerous as ignorance, and that in environments as unforgiving as caves, there's no room for even the smallest mistake. If you're someone who loves the challenge of tight passages, who feels drawn to places like the meat grinder because they test your limits and push your boundaries, please carry Connor's story with you. Remember that he was more experienced than most people will ever be, more prepared, more skilled, more careful, and it still nearly killed him. Remember that the rock doesn't care about your experience or your confidence. Remember that your body is only one bad decision away from being wedged in a space you can't escape. And ask yourself, is it worth it? Is proving you can squeeze through an impossibly tight passage worth risking your life, your cognitive function, your mental health, and the devastation it would cause to everyone who loves you?